Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. It's about time to get down to brass tacks in Carson City. We're a little over 2/3 of the way through the 83rd session of the Nevada legislature. The massive list of 1,000+ bills has been whittled down somewhat to 800 or so, but perhaps more important than what bills get passed and what bills fail is the budget. And early indicators are telling us the situation is not good this session, with revenues lagging behind expectations. So how do top lawmakers want to handle the impending budget crunch with cuts possibly on the horizon? What are Democrats and Republicans thinking about how the Silver State should weather the storm? This week, we have 2 guests in the thick of it, top leaders from each party, one from each chamber. Speaker of the Nevada Assembly, Democrat Steve Yeager, and Republican Senator Robin Titus, the Senate Minority Leader. As you'll hear, they have drastically different opinions on the path lawmakers should take to pass a balanced budget in the next month. This episode, we went down to the capital city once again to record interviews last Thursday with Yeager and Titus in the legislative building. We'll start with Speaker Yeager and hear from Senator Titus a little later. And I'm pleased now to be joined by the Speaker of the Nevada Assembly, Steve Yeager, representing District 9, part of Clark County. Which part of Clark County again, remind us?
It's southwest part of Clark County, so Bishop Gorman, IKEA, Rhodes Ranch, just southwest of the airport, really.
Very good. And you've been in the Assembly since the 2017 session, my first session as well, so we've overlapped in that regard. A lawyer by trade, but more importantly, long-distance runner
Yes.
and donut aficionado,
Yes.
because you have to have something to balance out all the donuts that you eat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being up here, getting outside, running, good way to clear your head. You could spend all day in this building if you wanted to. So be able to do some things that get you out in nature, I just think it sort of clears my head and makes me better at what I do in the building.
Did you wake up after like a deadline day, then just go run 9 miles to clear your head, or how often are you running?
Yeah, I would love to run 9 miles. One of the problems is we have Ways and Means almost every day, and it's at 8 o'clock in the morning. So generally, I can get about 5 or 6 miles in the morning, and I do that about 3 times a week. I'd love to do it 5 days a week, but you just need sleep sometimes too. And so that's the challenge. Is do I sleep an extra hour and a half, or do I get out there for a run?
Well, I'd say I would invite you to join and run the biggest little half marathon this Saturday morning, but I think you have Ways and Means meetings.
We do, and I ran the Reno half marathon last session 2 years ago on a Saturday,
cool.
and I loved it, and I was about ready to sign up for it this session, and I learned we have Ways and Means at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, so I'm not going to be able to make it, but maybe next year.
You learned. I think you're in the position of power to where you could move things around. But yeah, obviously the business is more important, and that's what we're talking about today. Let's start broad strokes. We'll get into kind of the deadline that happened this week. We're recording this on Thursday, a couple of days after the first House passage deadline. But what are Democrats broadly, Assembly Democrats, trying to achieve this session, and where do you think we stand on those issues?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one I think that's changed a little bit because of just the uncertainty out in the world, right? We came into session really wanting to focus on lowering costs, whether that's healthcare costs, working on housing issues, working on public safety. We still are working on those things, but the elephant in the room has been the budget, right?
Yeah.
And the federal uncertainty and the cuts that are coming from the federal administration has really, I think, changed the focus of this session, not just to we got to enact good policy, but how do we get out of here with a balanced budget in a way that doesn't hurt services that Nevadans depend on?
So take me a little bit behind the curtain, so to speak, with the budget process. I'll give a little bit of an overview this week. We still are a little bit ways out from the Economic Forum on May 1st when we'll get a more clear picture. But I'll read a line from a Nevada Independent story that came out just this week. In the first 9 months of the fiscal year, the state experienced a decrease of 3.2%, $102 million of tax revenue compared with that same part of 2024, and a 9% decrease in revenue from sales and use tax. We're kind of seeing this across the board. It's affecting the state. It's affecting our local governments, of course. And we'll have that more full picture on May 1st. But as it stands today, for folks who aren't following the budget process as closely, like, what does that mean when you guys are trying to put together a budget when we might have that much of a decrease in revenue?
Yeah, it just means, unlike the federal government, we have to balance our budget. We cannot spend more money than we have in the state. And, almost every state's like that. The federal government just print more money, right? And they can spend what they don't have. We can't. So when we talk about revenues going down, that means we're going to have to cut programs because we have to get out of here with the balanced budget, and our state laws require us to have a minimum end fund balance, right? You can't go in the red. So every day it seems like we get more information from the federal government that cuts are coming, and so on our side, we've got to figure out how to make those numbers work, and every household can think about this as well. You have to have a balanced budget, right? But I think more importantly than that, we're having to make really tough decisions because, you're talking about a state where we don't have a huge budget. We're not good at really anything. And you think about mental health and healthcare. So we're having to make decisions that are largely like we're not expanding any programs and then just trying to preserve what we can. But it has really gone drastically downhill since the beginning of session. Like coming into session, we thought things would be relatively flat. Yeah. But I think what you're seeing at the national level, both with the tariffs increasing costs and with the uncertainty really, really hurts because people don't travel. They don't come to Las Vegas. They don't spend money. For some reason, we're poking our neighbors in the eye. We're poking Canada. We're poking Mexico. And those are folks who come here and spend money, and they're not coming. And so you're seeing a decrease in room rates, gaming tax, sales tax, and that really is the lifeblood of the economy, at least in Southern Nevada.
Is it going to be cuts to existing programs is how we kind of get out of this and pass a balanced budget?
I think to be determined. May 1st is the economic forum, and that's just a fancy way of saying on May 1st, we're going to get the final numbers of what we have to spend. We got a report in December, and that's what we've been building the budget off of. But May is kind of like the final accounting. And as recently as a month ago, I thought that would be relatively flat. Now we're hearing it could be hundreds of millions of dollars less in projected revenue. Wow. And so that means we got to find another $200-400 million potentially to cut from the budget. And so I do think we're looking at having to cut services, which is heartbreaking, right? We had to do that during the pandemic, but that was because of a worldwide pandemic. We're in the situation we're now because these are intentional decisions being made by the federal government. And, that's what keeps me up at night is, normally when you're in a situation like this, the federal government helps. They come in with relief money. Think about the Great Recession or during COVID. In this instance, it's the federal government doing this to the states, and there's no other pot of money. So, the last month and a half of session is going to be really interesting and not in a good way.
And suffice it to say, we're talking about cuts is the backdrop of all this. Suffice it to say, anything having to do with new programs, new projects, is probably just not even on the table. Like when a lawmaker comes to you or they have a bill that has a fiscal note that is going to cost some extra money, do those bills stand a chance this year?
Not really. I mean, there are a lot of really good policies that legislators want to enact, but it costs money to enact policies. And so, we've talked to folks across the board and, including conversations with the governor that the money's just not there for expanded programs. So, we may have a little bit of one-time money, right? We have money from last fiscal year that wasn't spent. So we can spend that on one-time programs. But certainly you don't want to invest in something that's a long-term commitment right now with that financial impact. So, we're just telling people to be realistic. If we can pass policy that doesn't cost money, we want to do that. But this is just not a session where we're going to be able to expand.
Is it too early to say? I mean, you're in a position of power, obviously, as the Speaker of the Assembly. I don't know you don't want to make any cuts, I'm sure. But if you're looking at the budget, and as you guys have over the last couple of months, what do you think is something that we could live without as it stands today?
Well, I mean, really, we can't live without anything in this state, right? We're just underfunded in every single place. And I think really our priority has been we don't want to have to cut anything in education because we worked really hard with historic education funding increases last time, teacher pay raises. For us, that's like a sacred line we're not going to cross. And then the next biggest thing in the budget is healthcare. And, healthcare is a huge part of the budget. So there may be some things we could look at there. Healthcare is tough in this state already. So, those decisions are going to be difficult. But I think mostly we've been focusing on not expanding. There's a natural expansion of the population in Nevada. And with that, you want to expand programs and add capacity. And almost every agency that's come before us, we're like, sorry, we can't add any new programs, and we're trying to just stay flat. I just don't know if there's going to be enough money to be found there to balance the budget. So if we have to make those decisions at the end of session, maybe in the healthcare field, but nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about revenue, because there are a couple of proposals that have been or are on the table that would increase state revenue. The first one being the state lottery, that Assembly Joint Resolution 5. It passed a couple of years ago and did not make it out of the first committee deadline a few weeks ago. How come that was something that you guys didn't want to consider as a way to, that would probably have a big increase or contribute to a big increase in state revenue?
I think it depends. It depends how you structure a lottery, right? When I thought about the lottery when we started the process last session, my goal was really to get the multi-state games, right? Because the complaints I hear, people don't want to drive to Arizona or California to buy Powerball or Mega Millions when they have these huge jackpots. It turns out that piece of the lottery is a very small piece of the lottery. Where most states make their money is scratch-off tickets. Okay. That's the big one, right? And I never envisioned a lottery here that would have scratch-off tickets, because we have unlimited gaming here in the state. And so looking at those numbers, I don't think that would have brought in that much revenue, because really the bigger states get a bigger piece of the revenue in the multi-state games. California, Texas, Florida, they're population based. And the other thing with the lottery too is it would take time to implement, right? Because even if we pass the resolution, have to go to the voters next year, and then there have to be implementing legislation, have to be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. So I did not see that as a realistic short-term revenue boost. I think it would have taken years. And of course, people say, well, you could have a full-blown lottery, but you'd have to get a legislature to agree to pass a bill, and that bill would go to the governor to be implemented. So I don't think that was the revenue generator that folks thought. And, the more I looked at the lottery too, it really impacts lower income people more. And just with the economic situation we're now is I don't think it's the right time to do that.
Mm-hmm. What about property taxes? There is Assembly Joint Resolution 1, and full disclosure for our audience, we're going to be doing a longer form story on explaining Nevada's unusual, let's call it, property tax structure without getting too much into the weeds. It would essentially raise property taxes in effect, and that passed out of the Assembly in the first House passage deadline. How come Assembly Democrats are supportive of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'm glad you're doing a longer story on it, because we're one of one. We're the only state that has this weird depreciation model. And so what that resolution would do is it would reset the value upon sale. So if you don't stay in your house, you're not going to pay anything more. But it requires a constitutional change, because our Constitution is written in such a fashion. So I think from our perspective, we want to get that in front of the voters. Ultimately, the voters will decide. We can't do it on our own. But we want to give the voters a chance to think about, does that make sense for Nevada or not? And one of the important things about that property tax revenue, it largely goes to fund local services, police, fire, schools. Right. And so there's a lot of money that's left on the table, and we thought it made sense to start that process. But obviously, if it passes this time, have to pass the next legislative session in 2027, and the voters would decide in 28, and they could decide to keep things exactly how they are, or they could decide to change that system. But we wanted to give them that option. Again, not a short-term solution. I mean, you're talking 4, 5, 6 years before you'd see any impact from that. But I think it was a good time to put it in front of the voters.
Are you guys considering any shorter-term budget fixes, workarounds, ways to generate additional revenue, or are we pretty much dealing with the amount of money that comes down from the economic forum?
I mean, small things here and there, right? I have a bill that would allow cocktails to go from restaurants. Right. And, there's a 50-cent surcharge added to that to raise a little bit of revenue to fight driving under the influence. But we're not talking enough money that's going to plug budget holes. So, right now I think we're just trying to get a sense of where are we, and then how bad are things going to get on the federal level, and what does that mean for us? Because we have to get out of here at the beginning of June with the balanced budget. But, if I'm being honest with you, I think it's very, very, very likely we're going to be back in special session probably September, October, when the federal government finalizes their budget, and we're probably going to have to cut more, because I think, they got rid of the Department of Education. I think they're coming for Medicaid, and that's going to be a big deal. We have hundreds of thousands of Nevadans who rely on that, and if that federal money goes away, we are going to be in a real bad way in the state.
Let's talk about your guys' strategy as Democrats when it comes to the Republican governor in the governor's mansion in Joe Lombardo. Last session vetoed a record 75 bills, I believe it was. And it looks like you guys are kind of setting the stage, if you will, to send him a handful of bills that he may or may not veto. I'm thinking of the gun bills that would, prohibit 18 to 21-year-olds in that small window from being able to buy assault weapons. Physician-assisted suicide has been passed, and he's already said that he's going to veto that measure. How do you guys decide, which ones you guys send to the governor, kind of force his hand to make him make a decision one way or the other or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because it really is divided government, right? I mean, this separation of powers. We are the legislature, and I think our goal is to enact good policy, send it over to the governor. Obviously, he disagrees about whether some of that is good policy, but, I think about some of the vetoes from last session. They really would have helped, right? We had the story come out about corporate landlords adding hidden fees to rental contracts. Like, we had a bill to fix that last time, and it got vetoed, right? We had a summary eviction bill that would have just given a little bit more protection. That was vetoed. I still think those are good policies. So, we're working on that. And I know, Governor said he doesn't like some of that, but, we think they're good policies. We think gun safety, gun violence prevention is important. And the truth is, if we don't do the bill and we don't send it over there, we don't have any chance of getting it signed, right? And I like to say, everyone can change their mind. Everyone can evolve on these issues. So I'm not going to assume just because he vetoed it last session, he would veto it this session. I think the communication has been better, trying to figure out, are there ways we can change these bills to get you to sign them? And the benefit we have is last session when he vetoed bills, he gives you a veto letter and he says why he vetoed the bill.
Sure.
And we're able to try to go in and address some of those concerns. So I think those conversations have been productive, but this is sort of the way the world works. We pass legislation and the governor has that unchecked ability to veto or sign, but we're going to continue to make the case for what we think is good policy and policy and legislation that helps Nevadans.
You kind of touched on it, but one of my last questions was, how is your working relationship with the governor's office? Because we came into the session out of the State of the State where it was a very bipartisan message, want to work with both sides to make things better for Nevadans. And then we did hear in the comments that were leaked from the Lincoln Day dinner kind of a different message where he said along the lines of kind of F you to his critics and protesters. And obviously Democrats have been part of that group of critical of him as well. I mean, how's the relationship? Is it a good working relationship? Is it more tenuous now?
No, I think it's a pretty good working relationship. I mean, coming out of the State of the State, I think, what was challenging there was we were given a budget that had a deficit in it, right? We were given a budget by the governor that I think overspent like $300 million. So I think that that caused some ill will and ill feelings because normally you get a balanced budget. And so from the get-go, we were starting, from really behind the eight ball on that. But I think what's helped the process is, we were waiting for the governor's bills to come out. He gets 5 priority bills. And it just took a long time for those to get drafted because they really are gigantic bills. But we have 2 of them out now. And my feeling was always once we had some bills to actually talk about, it would be productive to sit down and talk. So we've started doing that. The Senate Majority Leader, the governor, and I get together and we talk about, what the priorities are. And I think we're moving in a good direction to be able to get out of session. Obviously disagree with a lot of the comments that he made at that dinner. People aren't being paid to protest out there. I think that dismisses what is a real angst and frustration of folks, not just here in Carson City, but in Nevada and the country as a whole about where we are as a country and what's happening. I mean, the rug is being pulled out from under people intentionally. And so, disagree with those comments, but, like anything, you don't have to agree on everything. I think the important thing is you sit down, you have communications, and you figure out where you can agree on issues.
All right. Assembly Speaker Steve Yeager, thank you so much for joining us for Battleground Nevada. We really appreciate getting some of your time because we know it is so limited, especially now that we're in the final third of this session. So thank you.
Yeah, nice to be here, and I'm looking forward to June where we can go out there and get in some longer hikes and runs.
Absolutely. Get out there, walk and hike in the hills of Carson City. Hope you get some time to do that real soon.
Thanks so much.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
And now to our conversation with Robin Titus. And I'm thrilled now to be joined by the minority leader in the Nevada Senate, Senator Robin Titus, representing District 17, all of rural western Nevada, pretty much.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I tell everybody I represent the Western Slope.
There we go, the western slope of the Silver State. Dr. Titus, we should be referring to you as. You and our graduate. Been in the legislature since 2014, but most importantly, and we were talking about this off camera before we started, you have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
I have.
That's incredible, and been to base camp at Everest.
It was very fun. Both trips were amazing. The Everest one, I actually spent a month there doing a trek to Nepal, visiting a lot of small little towns on the way. They knew I was a doctor, and I took a lot of supplies from a little hospital that they donated to me that I would take care of. And I had people knocking on our cabins and our huts. They heard that I was a doctor. They'd come and have me look at their teeth. They'd come and have me look at their knee.
Oh my gosh,
I sewed
it's
up
a humanitarian
I sewed up
climb.
people on the trail. I took care of a lot of people while I was there. And then when we left, there was a French clinic there, and I left all the supplies that I'd taken that I had left over with that clinic.
Awesome. I would love to talk about that for the next 20 minutes, but I do have to ask, you've also completed 10 marathons.
I have.
I'm trying to run my first one this year. What's your biggest piece of advice?
Don't go too far too fast. You know,
I've made that mistake.
In life, in general, you have to pace yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is you get all that adrenaline and you want to get really excited, but run your race and pace yourself. And the hardest part for me was, again, I have done 10 marathons, but you run a lot of marathons before that. You train a lot.
Yeah.
I did a lot of 20-milers training, but it was 2 weeks before the marathon where I didn't run and I did other things.
Yeah.
That's the hardest time for me. It's not to go run. That's
Getting
my
all
mental
jittery.
health is running. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. And it's actually a great segue because the Nevada legislative session is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes it feels like a sprint, but it really is a marathon, 120 days. You're the leader of the Senate Republicans. I mean, broadly speaking, 30,000-foot view here. What are you guys and your caucus trying to achieve this session?
Well, I think we're consistent with what we started out with: our public safety, education, housing, healthcare. I think economic reforms to make sure that everybody can afford to live and have a great lifestyle in Nevada and afford to be here. I think we are still on track for that. I think the governor's 5 major bills, of which you only have actually 2 that have actually dropped so far, I think that's consistent with that. I think our bills were consistent with that. And I think we're staying with that whole scenario.
How do you think about the budget constraints? And I outlined them a little bit in my previous interview with Speaker Yeager, so I won't reiterate them, especially for you. You know what's going on. I mean, there is going to be kind of a budget, maybe not a budget shortfall, but a lot less money coming in over the next couple of years than maybe was previously thought. How does that kind of constrain you guys? How are we thinking about the possibility of budget cuts to make over the next month?
Well, unlike the federal government, Nevada has to pass a balanced budget. The governor is mandated to give us a balanced budget and have a 5% leftover of our funds in the bank. I wish the federal government had to do the same. To that end, the legislature now takes the governor's budget, and there's holes in it. There's things that he's trying to look at and move funds differently, but then we're the ones responsible for actually finally passing that budget. So we take a hard look at it, and one of the things we're doing, we know we can't control what the federal government is going to do. The federal government is about 20% of our budget. What we have to do in Nevada is live within our means, and I hold everybody accountable for that. So when we look at what the governor presented, all these new positions that he's asking for, I'm agreeing with what the Democrats are looking at, saying, hey, you asking for 13 positions. Listen, we can't afford that. We'll give you 8 positions or 1 position. I think they're taking it really seriously, and I too am taking it, and I'm agreeing. We're agreeing to look at cutting some of the governor's budget. I think that's what we have to do because we cannot predict what's going to happen in Washington. Mm-hmm. We do, in my mind, control our own destiny. And so I don't want to be back in a special session. I want to have a balanced budget and prepare right now based on the information we have right now.
In a perfect world, obviously, you would not want to cut anything. Or,
That's not true at all.
or no,
I would, in a perfect world, I, as a fiscal conservative,
Sure.
would absolutely be wanting to cut stuff. I think our Nevada state budget is incredibly bloated. Looking
Where?
at where everywhere, looking at where we were in 2015, we had a $10.8 billion budget in 2015, my first session. Our budget right now is $25 billion. That's a 143% increase in budget in the last decade. Our population didn't increase that much. Our population went from 2.9 million people to 3.3 million people, so only a 14% increase in our population, but yet our budgets increased 143%. There's no justification for that. I am not for big government. I'm for a very fiscally responsible government.
So where will you or would you be looking to make cuts when it comes that time here over the next month?
I think a lot of it has to do with Medicaid. That's one of our big things. And we overexpanded in Medicaid when we added the childless adults to that. And granted, during COVID, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have work. So we had to cover everybody. Now, those folks are back to work. And if you look at who the biggest folks are on the Medicaid enrollees are Amazon employees, Walmart employees, the state of Nevada employees. We are covering the companies who are making millions and billions of dollars. We're covering the health care for their employees. That's not right. I think the employer should be responsible for that, not the state of Nevada.
And so you do support cuts to Medicaid, at least for that
Yeah, not for the vulnerable.
population.
As a medical doctor, it is critical that we make sure that the seniors, our kids, adults without kids who have medical needs, those folks we have to cover. There's no question about that. We have to cover them in preventive care because we know if we prevent healthcare issues, it saves us money in the long run. We need more access to care. A big push for me is more medical providers. What we don't want is to be covering the healthcare for folks when their companies and corporations are making a lot of money. The taxpayers are paying for their healthcare, and it's just not right.
What I hear from you, and you mentioned, Governor Lombardo asking for a certain amount of positions, and you really would want to see a smaller budget from the governor?
Very much so. I'd rather spend less in the state of Nevada. That is correct.
Okay. And so I take that to mean, obviously, you guys as Senate Republicans opposed to ways to generate revenue, property tax increases, of course. The state lottery was brought up, film tax credits. Walk me through why you guys are opposed to those.
Well, first and foremost, those film tax credits don't generate revenue. They've done very strict and very careful fiscal analysis of those film tax revenue or film tax credits. And what those credits are actually transferable tax credits. And I don't know if people really understand what a transferable tax credit is. So that's actually money that doesn't come into our general fund. And so we're looking at giving the film industry about a $200 million tax credit, which is craziness. And they can sell those tax credits to other companies. So so that means they're not paying. That a tax credit means you're not paying those taxes. And a day when we need those taxes to give them those tax credits that they could then sell, I will tell you, it's not. And they say, oh yeah, well you're going to make money here. What we're doing, looking at that income, is actually maybe we're going to give them $1, maybe we'll get back 50 cents. That's not good math. I wouldn't invest in that. And so we're asking the state of Nevada, Medicaid, healthcare to cut back, but yet we're giving this industry these credits. People are arguing that and it's a falsehood that they say that Trump is cutting back Medicaid and healthcare at the expense of to make billionaires richer, which is absolutely not the truth. The real billionaires that are making money are the people that are having their employees live off of Nevada's taxpayers for their health care and film tax industry. Aren't those billionaires? I'm sorry, it just doesn't the math doesn't work for me.
And what about property taxes? We've seen Assembly Joint Resolution 1, which is now in your chamber in the Senate, and push certainly from local governments and supported by Democrats who passed it through the Assembly to change our property tax structure to make, we're the only state in the country that doesn't have the property value kind of reset.
So what's happened in Nevada, so I have mixed emotions about that. Certainly we need to look, I'm not for state income tax. we do have to look at revenue and how do we go about that's fair? What is a fair tax plan? And so it always tends to be on the back of the property owners. And I appreciate the assessment. I live in a house that's over 100 years old. My tax rate has gone up every year. They reassess it, and my tax rate goes up. When I've looked at this thing, because it's not something that AJR1, I just read it literally today because it's not on our house. How's that going to work? They will make some money on that, but who's going to pay that? So before I would support any kind of a tax increase, and is it really a tax increase on the individual property owner, or is it now on the property value itself? And then the person buying it knows full well what those taxes would be. And so I'd have to be a real deep dive before I'd say, oh, yeah, I'm okay with that property intakes taxes. Because unfortunately, property owners are the one that tend to be the ones that are penalized for being successful and own a home.
You seem more open to that than I would have. And obviously, it's a long ways away from
yeah,
a possible
I'd have
vote,
to read
but
it
more
because
open than I
here's
would
the
have
reality. I think one of the things that government has to do, the responsibility of government should only be what private industry can't do for itself, right? So what government should do is infrastructure, roads, bridges, our defense, securing our borders, and defending our country. That's what government should do. Everything else, in my mind, should be in the private sector. All the businesses, all of those things. How do you run a government? How do you have your fire services? How do you do those things? Nevada's a terrible fire state. How do you help fight all those? We as citizens have to be responsible for those kind of things. So I'm not against every single tax. I'm willing to pay my share of my tax for law enforcement, for public safety, for our highways, all of those things. But who's paying it? How is it divided? And who gets the biggest penalties for being successful? That's my complaint. I want everybody to pay a little. And so how does that work? So is it always the property owners that are going to have to pay for this when we have, a certain percent of people that don't own property? So all that has to be figured out. For me, if it's a fair plan, people are paying, everybody has some skin in the game, I think that's a critical thing.
How are you guys working together with members on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, this session, especially compared to previous sessions that you've been in the Senate and the Assembly? How's the working relationship?
Well, I've been in leadership on both sides now, and I would tell you both times I've had great relationships with the majority parties. This last session, we had a deadline date. I met with Majority Leader Canizaro multiple times. We have lunch once a week going over, okay, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? What are you going to pass? What are you going to block? And likewise, and everybody kept their word. And I think the key in this bill, the only value you have here in this building is when folks know that you keep your word. And I think on both sides, we met jointly with the Republican senators, met with the Republican Assembly men and women today. First time we've met since the governor's state of the state was this morning, because it was kind of the dust is settled on what bills made it to both houses.
Sure.
So we needed to kind of come together and just see where we were, what did we do correct, what would everybody like to see different. And I think that communication is the key, keeping your words the key, and results, we'll see how that we all had most of us had bills survive. And I've already got a bill hearing on the Assembly, so I don't want to mind. I think what I really like, Ben, I think probably this session is the ability that just by talking to agencies, I'd much rather, I actually had a bill that didn't get a hearing to lower the number of bills we get because we have too many bills in each session. So I actually was able, just by talking to an agency on the bills that I was potentially going in, DMV, for example, I had issues when somebody has that, when you're 16 years old and you get your driver's license and they ask you, do you want to be a donor? Everybody always says, yes, of course. But then as you get older, you might change your mind. And it was really hard to get that little heart off your driver's license. You couldn't go online and do that. And there was a cost for that. So I put a bill in to change that. But when I talked to DMV about it, they said, we can do that without a law. I had another bill on Secretary of State, for example. I know I've been hammering the Secretary of State lately, but I will tell you, they have made some changes like that ballot drop-off boxes. They're actually, without a law, through what they can do already within their scope, going and picking up their drop boxes during the election day and start counting those. So, and then leaving another box so people can do that drop off. And then so that those results then can be released when the polls close to speed up the process. Didn't take a law to do. So any problems we can solve in this state that does not require legislation, That's what I much prefer.
Yeah, and well over 1,000 bills introduced in this session, which is a crazy number.
It's pretty typical. Every year is about 1,200. And again, that's where I say my bills were always to cut that in half because, at the end of the day, you don't have, is there really 1,200 new laws we need every other year? I mean, come on. So I would say pick a few that are major priorities that, yes, we do need to fix things. I mean, I had healthcare bills that upgraded or updated our law for physician assistants and nurse practitioners who didn't exist in 1864 when we wrote our original Constitution and the original NRS. So laws do need to be updated, but we don't need 1,200 new laws every year. Every other year.
Fair enough. I do have to ask you about one bill that is now in your chamber in the Senate side because it is, I think, of all the bills that we've covered, dozens of them, the most talked about, for better or for worse, on both sides, daylight saving time. Lock the Clock Act. It's going to be in your chamber. How do you feel about switching Nevada to permanent standard time?
Well, I introduced this same bill in our House, and Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch and I had discussed this last fall. And I said, well, you introduce it in your house, I'll introduce it in my house, and we'll see who gets the hearing, and I'll support you. And she was going to support me.
Okay.
I've introduced a bill about locking the clock, I think every session that I've been here, once with...
Oh, I should have known that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
once with Senator Hardy, once with Senator Gogachia, once on my own. And so it's been an interest of mine since my first session. And the reality for me, from a healthcare perspective as a medical doctor, more and more data has come out about the importance of let's stop changing the clock. People say, well, I want more daylight. I want daylight savings. And what I think they're giving us way too much credit thinking we're going to change the rotation of the sun because the amount of daylight is not going to change. It is going to be exactly the same regardless of what the Nevada State Legislature does. What we're looking at from, again, medical studies throughout the world have been showing that standard time, which is the time with the rotation, the days get longer and shorter based on the rotation and where the Earth is. That's the healthiest one for depression and some of these other illnesses that are really related to the amount of sunlight and the time, your sleep cycle, your circadian rhythms. I think so that most healthcare professionals, I would say practically all, really support staying on standard time and not locking the clock. It's bigger than people think, though. I think we've been on, and Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch and I have been on calls with our states that surround us who are all the legislation, all the legislation that is out throughout these states, including Washington, Idaho, California. Arizona doesn't change their clock. Hawaii doesn't change their clock. And so I think the reality is we're all looking at it. All of us support standard time. So it's in numerous houses. Our house just happens to run 120 days, so things move a little quicker here. Californians had it there for a while. They just move slower than sometimes they move too fast, but on this one, they're moving a little slower. So I think it's going to happen. People are concerned about it. We're getting calls about it. I think it's just mostly they want longer daylight. They want to be able to go out after school. But the days are getting longer anyway as time happens. And so I think I'm really pushing that from a healthcare perspective.
Okay, interesting. I'm very fascinated to see where that bill ends up and what the governor does with it if it comes to that.
Yeah, even our president says it's mixed. He wants to lock the clock, but he 50-50 on daylight or or standard time. Even he has addressed it. Congress has addressed it. Nobody's landing on something. I think we have to land on something.
Okay. All righty. Well, Senator Titus, thank you so much for making the time to join us this week on Battleground Nevada, especially given the time crunch that you guys will face over the next month. We really appreciate you carving out some time to join us here in our little makeshift studio. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Ben, for the invitation. I tell my family and all my friends, my life now is dictated. If I'm not in a committee, I'm living my life in 15-minute increments. And so that's the world I live in right now.
Yep,
but thank you.
Interview.
Nevada's important. It's worth it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
A special thank you to both Speaker Yeager and Robin Titus. And for our full coverage of the Nevada legislative session, make sure to watch and follow my TV stations, News 4 and Fox 11. If you made it to the end of this episode, I really appreciate it. If you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, anything at all, I want to hear from you. Shoot me an email to bjmargiott@sbgtv.com and put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a minute, I'd really appreciate it if you left a rating and a review. That helps the podcast show up higher in searches so more people can discover Ballot Battleground Nevada. Thanks for listening.